But certainly we're seeing quite a few more issues with control in annual meadowgrass on farm, and a lot more reports of it now. Some of it may be down to resistance, but some of it might be down to poor timing as well. And if you let that weed grow too big, especially in the likes of winter barley, you really don't have much alternative control, especially when you're moving into the spring. And certainly we would have seen that maybe in 2023, particularly whereby you were lucky to get crops sown and you didn't get back in to put a herbicide on those crops until maybe in some cases January or February.
Planting of winter cereals is now underway, with good progress being made in the northeast, while things are moving a little bit slower down south. As crops go in, attention soon turns to weed control. In recent years, growers are facing increasing challenges with grass weeds, particularly the likes of annual meadowgrass and Italian ryegrass, particularly as resistance to herbicides continues to develop. I'm Ciarán Collins, standing in for Michael on this week's Tillage Edge, and I'm joined by Vijaya Bhaskar and Shay, Phelan, both from Teagasc Oak Park, to discuss weed control in winter cereals. Shay, maybe before we get into weed control, can you give us an update on sowing activity across the country? And, have growers managed to get crops in the ground, or are people holding off, because of the current low grain prices?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ciarán. Certainly the bigger growers who have a lot of area to cover, they've all started to probably a week, maybe even 10 days into drilling now at this stage. They started predominantly with probably rye. So certainly I was down the country there last week, and there seemed to be quite a bit of activity going on down there. So I'd imagine pretty much all of the rye is done at this stage. And then I think a lot of people moved on to first wheats, and then finding out they're moving into winter barley now at this stage. So there's quite a bit going on now. That said, talking to a few merchants or talking to a few advisors around the country in the last couple of days, there seems to be somewhat of a lower area or a lower amount of seed, should I say, delivered or taken at this stage from depots. So whether that means that there's going to be less grain or less crops planted this autumn or not is probably a little bit early to say yet, but certainly you'd be a little bit worried about the fact that people haven't committed to sowing winter barley or winter wheat or whatever it happens to be at this stage. And I suppose looking at the likes of oats, people who would have been growing quite a bit of oats are probably sitting on the fence at the moment to see what they're going to do. So I suppose that's where things are at the moment. It's going to be an interesting couple of weeks in October to see what way this pans out.
Yeah, fair enough. I suppose the weather will be a big factor, I suppose, down the road as well in the next 2 weeks, I suppose, really, as to how much
absolutely. Absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see, like we're talking about storm coming in tomorrow. So it'll be interesting to see what effect that has. I think certainly on the margins around maybe the west coast and maybe northwest, you could find land gets very wet very, very quickly, and that could have an impact as we move into October.
Okay, thanks, Shay. So I suppose, look, the topic of the day really is looking at weed control and maybe trying to how to get good weed control in winter cereals. And I suppose grass weeds have been a hot topic in recent times, or other broadleaf weeds are coming into play as well. Shay, if I remember rightly, at the Tillage Forum this year, you strongly highlighted the importance of pre-emergent herbicide applications. So maybe just why is this approach more effective until maybe delaying or maybe a more convenient timing really with an aphicide at the 2 to 3 leaf stage?
Yeah, and I suppose we're really looking at the effectiveness of the herbicides and when they work best, because while we look like we have a lot of options out there, when you actually break it down into the active ingredients, what we don't have a huge amount of diversity in the herbicides that we have. If you take the likes of flufenicid, DFF, pendimethalin, things like that out of it, I mean, prosulfocarb, things like that, and a bit of clothalurone, we're pretty limited in what we have, albeit there's a lot of different generic products out there that, you would think you probably have a lot. But I suppose what we see predominantly is a lot of these products that are out there generally tend to work best when they're applied pre-emergence, when the weeds are only germinating or are very, very small. And I know Vijaya has done a nice bit of research there in the last year or so, looking at the performance of herbicides in a pre-emergence scenario versus post-emergence scenario on things like annual meadowgrass. And that seems to be a weed that's becoming more and more of an issue. And certainly we've seen, and I know Vijay will talk about it in a while, but certainly we're seeing quite a few more issues with control in annual meadowgrass on farm, and a lot more reports of it. Now, some of it may be down to resistance, but some of it might be down to poor timing as well. And if you let that weed grow too big, especially in the likes of winter barley, you really don't have much alternative control, especially when you're moving into the spring. And certainly we would have seen that maybe in 2023, particularly whereby you were lucky to get crops sown and you didn't get back in to put a herbicide on those crops until maybe in some cases January or February. And in that case, then you were really, really limited in what you could use. So I suppose what we're trying to encourage people to do is to trying to use pre-emergent herbicides where possible at all to try and give yourself a better chance of controlling weeds.
Okay. So you teed that up nicely for Vijay there to come in. I suppose, Vijay, at that same tillage forum, you did speak about the rise in suspect samples of annual meadowgrass that you're seeing. Maybe you could share with listeners, I suppose, kind of, what numbers are you seeing? And secondly, then maybe your insights into why you think this is happening.
I suppose so far we have confirmed ALS resistance, the likes of Pacifica resistance in 14 of 16 suspected annual meadowgrass populations. In terms of type of resistance, all of the resistant population carried target site resistance mutation, which affects Pacifica and other ALS herbicides. Unlike previous years, where we tested suspect cases, for the 2025 harvest, we collected annual meadowgrass randomly. These weren't really suspected of resistance. Our main focus was collecting samples of bromes, wild oats, blackgrass, or Italian ryegrass. But where annual meadowgrass was present in those fields, we decided to collect them. So in total, in the 2025 harvest, we collected about 9 annual meadowgrass samples, and out of which 4 were found to be resistant to Pacifica. So I suppose both the suspect and random sample results suggest that there are likely many more cases of resistance out there. In terms of why we are seeing increase in resistance in annual meadowgrass, I suppose, Ciarán, some farms are relying more on spring-applied ALS herbicides such as Pacifica for broad-spectrum weed control in winter wheat. This single product approach is being used instead of residual type herbicides, the ones Shay mentioned, which are more effective at managing ECT control weeds like annual meadowgrass and at minimizing resistance risk. The situation differs in the UK, where blackgrass is the primary focus and growers use a robust pre-emergence program, which also addresses meadowgrass control. I suppose spring is a crucial time for managing bromes or wild oats in winter wheat. But if annual meadowgrass is not controlled early in the season, that is before the use of broad spectrum ALS herbicides, then resistance development is likely. And I suppose this is contributing to the rising number of annual meadowgrass resistance cases, which we are now seeing.
Okay, thanks, Vijay. That's very interesting, because I know that a lot of the samples you get in from farmers are generally suspect samples, but it's very interesting that when you picked random samples, in the 25 harvest, you actually picked up some of those that were actually resistant, which is a real worrying thing, really. Shay, if I can come to you, just based on what Vijay said there, what does that mean for control strategies? Like Vijay's clearly outlined there that there are certain issues with ALS chemistry. So in terms of a farmer, planting winter wheat, winter barley today, what does that mean for control strategy?
You're right, and Vijay is correct in terms of a reliance on a particular product or group of products like the ALS herbicides, like the Pacifica, monolith, and those things. Relying on them to do the same job every year is a risky strategy, because you don't know at what stage that resistance is going to suddenly appear or develop over a period of years. So really what that means is a multiple kind of product approach, or multiple factor approach, if you like. So I'll start off with, say, something like, first is knowing what weeds you're trying to deal with. Okay, so if you have, say, of a field, for argument's sake, that has a problem with sterile brome, you'd avoid putting winter barley into it, because you really don't have anything control sterile brome in winter barley. So you would start at that level rather than just relying on herbicides to give you whatever it is. But when we move on to herbicides, then you're really looking at trying to use mixtures of herbicides, or mixtures of active ingredients, should I say. So, like we would have mixtures there on our crop report website. So you're looking at maybe mixing something like Defy and Firebird or Defy and DFF or something like that. Maybe something like Tower, which has 3 different active ingredients in it. It has clothallion, it has DFF, or pendimethalin, should I say, and pendimethalin and DFF, sorry, should I say. So using mixtures of active ingredients is always going to give you a better control because you're mixing and matching what the strengths and weaknesses of each of the different products. So there are plenty of products out there that you can mix. Like I said, we have a number of different mixes that we can use. And rather than relying on a single active, if you like, which really is putting it under pressure.
Okay, thanks, Shay. So if I'm picking that up right, go early and certainly mix of actives, especially in
Yes.
the likes of meadowgrass, is
Yes.
not to rely on the post-em solution, I suppose, really,
Exactly.
isn't
And
it?
I suppose the other thing, yeah, Ciarán, on that too, and I think it's something that probably caught a lot of people out in 2025. Quite a lot of people use, say, the likes of Firebird Met, which is going to be gone this year. You can only use it up until the 23rd of November this year. And certainly going around at some of the spring walks this year, people were very, very happy with the control level that they got with, say, the likes of Firebird Met. But I think what you have to realize is that sometimes these products, not sometimes, they all run out. They have a certain persistency in the soil. So they do run out of steam after a period of time. So whatever you apply in the autumn, don't expect that to last all the way through to next July or August. You're going to have to come in with a spring tidy up on most crops at that stage.
Okay. So thanks, Shay. Vijay, if I can come back to you, Italian ryegrass, I suppose, is very topical at the moment, and it is becoming a bigger challenge. And I know that you in 24, you picked up Ireland's first glyphosate resistant Italian ryegrass sample, which obviously is very worrying. But more broadly, what level of resistance are you seeing with Italian ryegrass?
Kiran, out of all the samples that has been submitted and tested, 80% of the samples were found to be suspected samples were found to be resistant. So that's pretty alarming. And also, if you look at the mechanism, resistance mechanism in Italian ryegrass is quite complex. We are seeing both target site resistance and non-target site or metabolic resistance to the likes of ACKs and ALS herbicides. To be precise, NTSR is quite widespread in our Italian ryegrass population. If you take the likes of ACK's resistance, NTSR population tends to affect Axial and Falcon, but not necessarily Stratus or Centurion, as these herbicides are difficult to metabolize. Whereas when it comes to ALS resistance, regardless of whether it's a target site resistance or a metabolic resistance, both types tend to affect the likes of Pacifica and Broadway Star. And also, Kiran, the mutation IDs are quite important when it comes to target site resistance to ACKs herbicides. The most common one we see is 2078. This is a very important mutation because it tends to affect all ACKs herbicides, meaning the products like Axial, Falcon, Stratus, and Centurion Max are likely to be ineffective. The next most common mutation we see is 1781, which usually affects Axial, Falcon, and Stratus, but the efficacy of Centurion Max varies pretty much field-to-field basis. That's why resistance testing is so crucial to decide the best management option.
Yeah, so I'm picking up from that, Vijay. It is a very worrying scenario because of the degree of resistance that you're finding, but also you can very quickly run out of control measures, I think.
That's the problem that we are observing with the Italian ryegrass, and we have identified glyphosate resistance as well. So I suppose no herbicide is immune to resistance.
Okay, so Shay, back to you on this one. Like, if a grower suspects they've Italian ryegrass in their field, what's the most sensible, or what's the first step they should take?
If they expect that, or if they think that they have it, is to come up with a plan to see how they control it. I mean, as Vijay rightly said, if you have a suspected population there, you probably, this stage is going to be too late to do a resistance test on that. So I suppose you really have to look at what options you've used beforehand and maybe work back from that. So if you've used, say, the likes of Pacifica before, or you've used Axial before or something like that, and you're sowing winter wheat or certainly winter wheat, you'd have to look and see, did you get a level of control from those products before this? And if you feel that you didn't get a level of control from either the likes of an ALS herbicide or the likes of of action from that point of view. Well, then if you thought you got poor control, there's pointless really in going with something like that again in 2026 to try and control that. So really you're trying to look at a pre-emergence type control there, something like Firebird Met or something like that, that's going to give you a certain level of control and maybe sensitize that product. Or if you can get in a little bit earlier again and mix it with, say, like the Avadex Factor and make sure that has to go on pre-emergence, that probably will give you a level of control. But the likelihood is, I suppose, in that scenario, people are trying to get as much drilling done as they possibly can. And quite often that pre-emergence application is forgotten about or doesn't get done. But I think really and truly where we are today talking about pre-emergence control, the likes of an Avadex plus your Firebird is probably going to give you the best control, I suppose, in a pre-emergence situation.
Or maybe leave it till the spring altogether if that's an option on the farm, maybe.
Yeah, but again, as I say, you need to be cognizant of what you use in that field before, and if you still have a problem in that, then you have to ask yourself why you still have a problem, and is it going to be a problem again in 2026?
Okay. Last one, Vijay, for you. I suppose, we've spoken a lot about, resistance and choosing the right herbicides and that. Like, for listeners, what would you feel are the key take-home messages that you'd like to leave with growers to kind of slow down this development of resistance? We all know it's inevitable, but, what are the key message, one or two key points maybe that growers could take that would slow down the development of resistance on their farm?
The effective products we rely on today, I suppose, won't last forever unless we use them judiciously, especially with the growing risk of losing residual type herbicides. The reality is we could soon run out of viable options. That's why it is critical we act now. So the key take-home message is we have to adopt integrated weed management practices to protect the tools we have for as long as possible. So some of the key points, I suppose, is don't rely on a single product approach for weed control. Adopt cultural tactics, the likes of stale seedbed, especially in non-plow systems, delayed drilling, spring cropping, especially in fields with high infestation, or to avoid peak germination. Plowing as a reset tool, and as Shay mentioned, the use of pre-emergent herbicide to reduce early competition. And also, when using the post-emergence, make sure the right product is selected, and always use a maximum label rates, and adopt a zero tolerance approach when it comes to survivors, because adopt either a simple like an androgging or quite a drastic measure like a crop destruction before seed set. Maintain a strict biosecurity, stay vigilant, and as you know, the likes of blackgrass or Italian ryegrass appearing on your farm for the first time may well be resistant. And the last important thing I urge is that use resistance testing as an early warning tool, not to just confirm what you already suspect.
Okay, thanks, Vijay. And I suppose good old-fashioned hen roguing, if you've got a few strays in a field, is going to pay dividends in the long run, I suppose, really. Mm-hmm. Shay, final word to you. I suppose, as we've discussed there's no catch-all, solution for weed control in either winter wheat or barley. We generally tend to need to follow up in the spring. So I suppose maybe from your perspective, what weeds should be prioritized in the autumn, and maybe, what advice would you have for growers in terms of a strategy to control these weeds then?
Yeah, well, as we've mentioned already, Ciarán, so far today, like you're obviously looking at the grass weeds. Where the grass weeds are an issue, you have to tackle those first, because the control measures of those post-emergence are not as abundant. So really after that, then you're looking at the likes of chickweed, cleavers, charlock, which can be very competitive. And then I suppose you're really looking at the likes of poppies and things like that do have a problem with resistance in certain circumstances. So you're trying to control all those ones, and not relying on ALS herbicides in the spring. Albeit that in most fields now, you will end up with some sort of a spring application of some sort of a spring acting herbicide. And again, I just caution people on that, because we are starting to see more broadleaf weed resistance coming out as well. So if you're applying a spring herbicide as well, again, don't rely on a single active ingredient there. Mixtures will give you better control and slow down, as we say, the development of resistance, because look, we know over time they all probably are going to develop resistance over a period of time.
Thanks, Shay. That's really, and Vijay, that's really comprehensive, I suppose, really back to where we started, the pre-em and the autumn with a mixture of herbicides, to me seems to be a very good starting point to build on. So listen, thanks again, Shay and Vijay, for your time today.
Thanks, Ciarán.
Thanks, Ciarán.
That's it for this week, and my thanks to Shay and Vijay for joining me on the show. As always, rate, review and follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I am Ciarán Collins, and thanks for listening.